Today, we're talking about downburst, a type of thunderstorm that can be very impactful and also very common.
And it was a really interesting conversation because even though it's pretty common, it can really surprise you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation because we talked about how research has come a long way. And while those surprise pop up thunderstorms can be very, very impactful, oftentimes some of those downbursts with really, really strong winds can lead to tragic deaths. Like back in the 70s, we saw hundreds of deaths caused by downbursts. Now, today, we've increased the accuracy of forecasting these downbursts, and the National Weather Service are still getting better and better about issuing warnings about downbursts. Now, in this episode of HailChatter, I found this really interesting, and we talked with one of the scientists at the National Weather Center that is researching downburst, and he's helping with that accurate warning alongside National Weather Service forecasters. So we talked about this weather phenomenon, we defined it, we talked about some really impactful events, and we talked about how his research is helping to keep you safe.
Before we jump in, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you enjoy this episode, make sure to share it with a friend.
Hey, thanks for joining us on HailChatter this afternoon. I'm meteorologist Taylor Cox, Collin Hunt, of course, in our Detroit office at HailTrace. And we also are joined with Charles Kuster, a scientist out of OU. Now, Charles, give us a little bit about your background, and we're going to be talking about downbursts today. So tell us how you got into that and how you were interested in this topic.
Yeah, so I started off as a student at the University of Oklahoma. I got my bachelor's degree from OU. And it was at that time that I met my advisor for graduate school. And it was my master's research that was about downbursts. So that's how I started getting into downbursts. I did some research on phased array radars and how it was scanning a downburst storm that occurred in Oklahoma. And then after I graduated, I was hired at the University of Oklahoma's Cooperative Institute. And then a couple of years ago, I moved over to the National Severe Storms Lab, which is where I work currently.
Awesome. Well, and for people that don't know, you used some big words in there. Phased array radar is actually what they used as the acronym PAR in the movie Twisters. So if you heard Storm Team PAR, or I think that's what they called them.
Yep,
phased array radar, Storm PAR. We use these big words, but we always have fun acronyms in meteorology.
Yes, probably too many.
So let's start with just defining for our audience, what is a downburst? Have they seen it before? How common is this? I'll let you take over there.
Yeah, so downbursts are basically when you have a bunch of cold air that sinks throughout a thunderstorm. And that's called a downdraft. And if that downdraft is strong enough, so the air is moving down quick enough, when it reaches the surface, it kind of pushes out in all directions and can cause damage and really strong winds. And the burst part of it, the strong damaging winds of the surface, is called a downburst. People have probably experienced these, especially if you live in the southeast or the southern plains. If you have those summertime thunderstorms and there's just suddenly some really strong winds, that would be a downburst. They happen all the time, especially in the summer months. They are relatively small, so it's not like everybody sees them all the time. But if you've been in those really strong winds in a thunderstorm, that would likely be one of those downbursts.
So on the downbursts you're talking about there, my understanding is a lot of people confuse them with tornadoes. Are they similar as far as the damage they can cause, or should people view downbursts? How would they view them differently than a tornado?
Yeah, so downbursts are very different from a tornado in that downbursts don't rotate at all. Obviously, a tornado is rapidly rotating air that can cause really severe damage. Downbursts are just straight line winds. If you've heard the term straight line winds, that's part of downbursts are one version of straight line winds. Downbursts can cause really severe damage. You can have winds 80 to 100 miles an hour in a downburst, but they don't approach the same strength that a tornado would. Winds in a tornado can be over 200 miles an hour. You certainly do not get that with downbursts.
I wanted to, and Collin, I think we were right on the same page here because I wanted to give some terms that the news or headlines that I've seen whenever I was Googling downbursts, just the first things that came up. These are some terms that people use to describe a downburst. And I wanted to get your opinion on this, Charles. Now, some people say a rain bomb, and then others, as you were mentioning, Collin, a downward tornado. Now, I'll let you, what are your first reactions to that?
Rain bomb is interesting because we've studied there are two different types of downbursts. There's a wet downburst, which is strong winds that occur with really heavy rainfall. And those are common in the southeast US and the southern plains. And those, like, if you capture a video of them, it does look like this big blob of rain that's coming down towards the ground. That's the downdraft. That's the strong air coming down from a thunderstorm. So rain bomb, I'm not sure exactly how accurate that is, but it's interesting. I don't think that's really that far off from a wet downburst.
It's a great visual.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way of describing almost what you see when that wet downburst is happening. In the western US, especially like in places like the Colorado Front Range, you get dry downbursts, which are strong winds with almost no rain at all. So you wouldn't be able to see those as any kind of visual sense. It would just all of a sudden you'd be getting strong winds at the surface. Downward tornado is definitely a lot less accurate for a downburst, just because there's no rotation. It forms completely differently. Tornadoes are associated with upward motion in a thunderstorm. Downbursts are downward motion and no rotation.
That downward tornado to me was also giving whenever the news will describe a derecho as a land hurricane. And I was like, it's a descriptor.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to move on because, we described this phenomena, but I wanted to give some examples for people who may still be a little bit confused. There have been some notable events over the last few years. We can go all the way back to 2011. I know that you studied a lot the Norman downburst. Give us some impacts that people may remember from that event.
Yeah, so June 14th, 2011, we had a really strong series of downbursts that came into the Norman, Oklahoma area. We had 82-mile-an-hour winds recorded. There were power lines down near the OU campus. There were big tree branches down on the OU campus. That event was also kind of intense because there was also golf ball size hail with that particular storm. So you had hail that was being driven by 70-mile-an-hour winds. I know there was a lot of siding and roof damage with that event. And that's the one that I did my research on. So if you were in the Norman area at that time, you probably at least saw the big rain bomb, we'll call it, the big heavy area of rain. And if you were at the OU campus or north of there, you probably had some really strong winds that day.
And that was very, kind of bringing it back to a little bit more recent. I know that a lot of people remember the Austin downburst that happened just earlier this year. And it was very, very similar where we had those strong, intense winds, but we also had some large hail with that as well. So it was just this very, very impactful thunderstorm in a big populated area. So a lot of people probably have experienced a downburst in some form or another. What are some other events, Charles, that you also studied?
So I've studied a lot of different downbursts across the country. At least in the research that we've done recently, we've looked at 89 different downbursts. A lot of them tend to be a little bit smaller. We're looking at the popcorn thunderstorms that occur in the southeast that are especially difficult to predict. So a lot of the downbursts that we studied there were kind of small, maybe a little bit lower on the impact side, maybe some tree branches down, maybe some power lines down at the most. So I can't necessarily point to a specific event that people might remember, but it just goes to show like these things do have wide-ranging impacts. You could have everything from 85-mile-an-hour winds in Austin that a lot of people notice to 75-mile-per-hour winds down near Wayne, Oklahoma, which is about 30 miles or so south of Norman. Caused a couple tree branches to break But that was one of the downbursts that I studied.
Well, and I asked that, and you hit the nail on the head right there, because very similar to tornadoes, downbursts come in all shapes and sizes. So it may not be just this massive event, but it could be that summertime pop-up thunderstorm. We experienced that during rush hour just a few weeks ago in Oklahoma City. It was quite a sight to see. It was on the western side of the city. It knocked over some trash cans. It was trash day, so we saw a few trash cans floating down the street. But other than that, the impacts were pretty minor.
Yeah.
So I actually want to go all the way back now to the 60s and 70s and 80s when downburst research had just started. And I want to highlight here how far we've come. So downbursts, unfortunately, got famous for tragic accidents. And Charles, feel free to jump in whenever, if you want to here. But downbursts got famous from tragic accidents. Actually, a lot of planes would fly through these thunderstorms thinking that they were your everyday pop-up thunderstorm, your summertime thunderstorm, that it's okay to fly through occasionally if you need to. Unfortunately, those small pockets of really strong wind got those planes and caused a lot of tragic deaths because of it. So scientists, they said, what in the world is going on here? How can we fix this? And how can we study this to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And we've made it all the way to here. We've defined a downburst. We know how to forecast them. But I know that research is getting better and better and better. Can you talk about that? And just from your time researching this, what was that, 10 years ago? Am I correct? How long have you been studying downbursts?
Let's see. I guess it's been about 13 years now.
About 13 years. Okay, so I had a good guess with 10.
Yeah, that was very close.
So even just within the last 10 years, we've talked about how far we've come in the last 50, 60, 70 years. But even within the last 10 years, what has that research looked like? How far have we come?
Yeah, so I mean, you made really good points about in the 60s and 70s, we didn't even know that downbursts existed. Radar technology was still, in its more beginning stages. It was hard to see these things. And as radar technology evolved, we were able to detect downbursts better. Lots of airports across the country have radars nearby called terminal Doppler weather radars that can help detect the changing winds that occur with these downbursts. And so we have not had aircraft accidents and fatalities because of downbursts in many years, thanks to that early research. In the last 10 to 15 years, radar technology has continued to advance. We have a relatively new type of radar technology called dual polarization radar, which basically just allows you to know the shape of the precipitation that's out there, so you can tell the difference between rain and hail and rain and snow. And so that is one piece of that dual-pol radar is a radar signature that helps to see things that cause a stronger downdraft in a storm. So using that radar, we can see when there's heavy rain, or we can see that there's melting hail. And both of those things make a downdraft stronger and therefore make a downburst stronger. So really what happened was with this research, I was talking with a forecaster at the National Weather Service Forecast Office here in Norman. And he basically said, hey, I think I'm seeing something interesting in this new radar data when I'm trying to issue warnings for downbursts. Do you think we can do some research on that? And I said, absolutely. I love working with forecasters on all things research. And so that's really what sparked us looking at this new radar signature for downbursts. And it looks like it's a pretty good radar signature to, give a heads up that, hey, there is going to be a downburst in this area relatively soon. So a lot of the advancements in our research come from those advancements in radar technology. One
of those things that you mentioned there was, the different things that we can see on dual-pol. And a lot of our viewers know about dual-pol because that's how we detect hail here at HailTrace. We talk about it a lot during our live forecast coverage. Now, I assume, are you referring there to primarily KDP, NCC? Is that kind of what you looked at? By reading some of your research, that was my guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. KDP is the big radar variable that we looked at for this research. Because KDP is linked to the amount of just water that's out there in the atmosphere. So if you have higher values of KDP, it means that you have heavier rain. If you have more rain out there, the air is heavier. It kind of drags the air down in that downdraft, and that can cause a stronger downburst. And then another thing that's interesting with KDP is when you have melting hail, the hail basically gets a water coating on it, and it looks like a giant raindrop to the radar. And so KDP gets really, really high. So if you have really high values of KDP, it means there's melting hail. Well, melting is a cooling process. And if the air gets colder, it gets heavier. And if it's heavier, it sinks faster. And that's another way you can get a stronger downburst at the surface. So we use KDP to see what's called precip loading, all of that heavy rain, as well as melting, which both make a stronger downdraft.
So because of that melting and because of those cooler temperatures then, and cooler air will sink faster, that's often why with these downbursts, we can get not only strong wind, but also hail with that strong wind. Is that correct?
Yeah. We, especially for wet downbursts, melting hail is probably really important, maybe even the most important driver of these wet downbursts. Now, sometimes the hail completely melts before it reaches the surface. It is the summer, after all, it's hot. There's a lot of melting that occurs. But sometimes, and we're not exactly sure how often, but you can definitely get that hail at the surface. Just like that Norman downburst had golf ball size hail. Thankfully, it's not usually that large, but you can definitely get hail with these downbursts.
So this new technique that you're discussing, being able to spot a downburst, is there certain scenarios where it works best? Or, for example, you were talking about the wet downburst versus the dry. Does it work, this technique, as well for the dry downburst, and being able to spot and be able to forecast one of those storms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our work focused on wet downbursts to start off. But we also did look at dry downbursts along the Colorado Front Range. And basically what we found is that this radar signature does not exist with dry downbursts, unfortunately. So this really is a radar signature to be used with wet downbursts that have that melting hail, that have that heavy rain. And those typically occur southern plains, Midwest even, and Southeast U.S. Unfortunately for those living in Colorado and New Mexico and places like that, we have more research to do on what radar signatures can help with those, since it doesn't look like KDP will be that helpful. And the reason for that is you just have really light rain or really small ice that either sublimates or just kind of doesn't really melt very much. And so your KDP stays low all the time. So we don't get that nice high KDP that we're looking for to help predict a downburst.
And then, so kind of following up to that, so that you're able to take a look at the wet downburst. That June 14th, 2011 downburst that we had in Norman, that was a wet downburst. And so if you had been using this technique back then, what would it have looked like, at least to forecast and be able to get a warning out to people back then using this type of technique?
Yeah, so that storm definitely would have had this nice KDP radar signature. We call it KDP core. Basically, what it would have looked like is kind of in the mid-levels of the storm, near and below where the melting layer is, so where the temperature goes from below 32 to above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you would get these high values of KDP. On typical color tables, that's going to look like bright greens and yellows and oranges. So you basically would have a nice big blob of bright greens and yellows and oranges, approaching Norman. And that would have been that indicator that, hey, there's some cold sinking air coming towards Norman to get that warning out or build confidence. This storm did have a severe thunderstorm warning with it. The Weather Service does a great job of issuing warnings for these things, despite them being challenging. But this radar signature, we think, can help build the confidence in what the forecasters are seeing. And sometimes I think this KDP radar signature is easier to use than something like reflectivity, just because it does show up really nicely and it does seem to be a reliable signal that a downburst is about to happen.
And those warnings are so important, of course, this is that people can get a heads up of what's going to happen. And I liked how you put that, to increase the confidence of issuing those warnings. I feel like when the National Weather Service has a lot of confidence in something, they can give extra info to the broadcasters out there. It gives people more confidence to take action as well. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of your research and how having those accurate warnings are very important?
Yeah, and so we talked about how with aviation, with airplanes, it's really helped to reduce the number of crashes, basically take it to zero. For forecasters, it is a little bit harder because you're trying to figure out, okay, when do winds cause damage and impacts to people? And that's when you'd want to issue a severe thunderstorm warning. Much weaker winds can affect aviation, so pretty much it's whenever there's a downburst, planes stay away. But for a forecaster, figuring out when to issue that warning, that's the hard part. And so that's really what this idea of this research was. Predicting these downbursts and whether they're going to cause damaging winds or not is a big challenge. And so we're really just trying to give forecasters another tool that they can use to build that confidence that, yes, this storm that I'm looking at is going to produce a strong downburst that could cause damage, and it needs a warning. So if they're able to have that confidence and issue that warning, it'll give people the alert that, all right, hey, I need to either go inside or, take whatever actions they need to do to make sure that those strong winds do not cause them danger.
And now what's next? You've accomplished so much with this research. Where are you going with this next? Future research, if you will.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm really trying to work on right now is communicating the research out and working with forecasters to figure out how can we best use the research in those warning decisions. So we're looking at how do we best visualize this radar signature so that a forecaster can use it best. And so myself, as well as other researchers and forecasters, are looking at ways to show the radar data that really highlight this radar signature and would be a quick and easy way for forecasters to use it to actually issue those warnings or build the confidence in those warnings. So communication of research is really important, but also like taking it from research world, which is where I work, into operational world, which is where the forecasters work. And to me, that's such an important step in the research process. We call it research to operations. And that's really, really important piece.
Right,
in terms of like the research world, I think linking this radar signature with other radar signatures is something that we want to look at. So maybe if we use 2 or 3 radar signatures together, does that help give us like an evolutionary picture of what the storm is doing? And then, of course, stuff like phased array radar, what can rapid update radar data, what can that show us about downbursts and specifically the KDP signature?
I love that we started with PAR and we're right back with PAR. Well, Charles, I think those are all of my questions. Is there anything that we have not asked today that you want to talk about here?
Well, that's always such a good question. I think the biggest thing is just like, I really think that this research has worked because researchers and forecasters worked together. Like I worked side by side with, Randy Bowers was the forecaster we worked with, and then Jacob Carlin was another researcher that we worked with. And we all just worked together in such a fun way to make sure that the research was applicable to forecasters. And Randy really helped to drive that. So I think that's just a really cool way to do research. And then the thing that I always try to mention is, this is for wet downbursts. And we specifically looked at those summertime pulse thunderstorms that occur when there's not a lot of wind shear. So that is one of the differences with that Austin downburst, was it occurred with a supercell storm, or a storm that's rotating, and there's typically wind shear involved. So we didn't do research on that specifically, but there are other groups that have done research on downbursts in supercells, and they're also finding these KDP signatures inside of supercells. So I do think that KDP is useful across different storm modes, not just the summertime pulse thunderstorms, but across multiple different storm modes as well.
Very different there. I mean, because our viewers will know this, that we can make a forecast and then we get a pop-up summertime thunderstorm that totally either throws us off guard or surprises us in some way. And so that's kind of what you're talking about here, right? That's what you're studying.
Yeah. Those are specifically the storm type that we study.
Everyone's got that one thunderstorm in their head that they're like, that surprised me. I didn't think that was going to happen. Those summertime thunderstorms, there you go, will definitely surprise you.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, or being here with us today and giving your time and your information. This is very educational. We appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.